Why this topic is so close to your heart?
Because I spent 16 years in prison from age 17 to 32 for a murder and rape, which I didn't commit prior to being exonerated through DNA testing.
We learn about his story and his case, and then we have the opportunity to exchange our experience in last year.
I was excluded by the DNA before the trial happened.
DNA evidence can be very powerful regarding exonerating people.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. There are 2 million people in prisons in the United States, a 500% increase over the last 40 years. Now, over the same period, the number of incarcerations have doubled here in Taiwan. So in today's episode, we take a critical look at the criminal justice system and those who are failed by it. And to understand how and why innocent people are sent to prison and why it's nearly impossible for them to get justice, we are joined by Jeffrey Deskovic from New York, a criminal justice advocate and lawyer with a master's degree in criminal justice focusing on exonerations. And he's also the founder of the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. And from Taipei, we have Yun-ching Ko, the Deputy Executive Director of the Taiwan Innocence Project. Thank you both for being part of the program. I'm going to start with you, Jeffrey. Now, you were a victim yourself of the American justice system. Can you explain to our audience why this topic is so close to your heart and why it's now your life's work and mission?
Because I spent 16 years in prison from age 17 to 32 for a murder and rape, which I didn't commit prior to being exonerated through DNA testing.
Right. And Yun-ching, what you do now addresses that. Can you tell us a little bit about the Taiwan Innocence Project?
Taiwan Innocence Project was founded in 2012. Over the past 12 years, we have received 108 claims of innocence. We have accepted and taken 34 cases with 38 clients. And for now, we have 14 exonerations, including 2 cases that were sentenced to death. So I think we have a lot of friends internationally, and we know that a lot of people around the world are also devoting into innocence work. And that's how I met Jeffrey during the Innocence Network conference, and we learned about his story and his case, and then we have the opportunity to exchange our experience in last year.
All right, Jeffrey, tell us about the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation and what it does.
So it's a nonprofit organization that frees wrongfully convicted people while also pursuing policy changes aimed at preventing those injustices. We opened our doors in 2011, and so far we have helped free 14 people, and we helped pass 6 laws. I did start the organization using some of the compensation I received in connection with my being wrongfully in prison for 16 years.
Right. So, as you said, you're now carrying forward your fight against wrongful convictions in the U.S. Now, I just want to put forward some numbers to you. Based on the World Prison Brief in 2021, here's a global map of the largest prison populations in the world. The U.S. tops the list of countries with the highest number of people incarcerated per 100,000 inhabitants. They are followed by Rwanda, Turkmenistan, El Salvador, and Cuba. And I know in the U.S., Jeffrey, there's immense pressure for convictions to happen and convictions to happen quickly. Can you tell us what that does to those who are going on trial and the likelihood that they don't receive a fair trial?
Well, it definitely impacts the ability to have a fair trial. You know, when if there's a high profile case that is, one that's gotten a lot of media attention and has a particular notoriety to it, there's a lot of pressure on the police to make an arrest. There's a lot of pressure on prosecutors to get a conviction. I think that judges can get swept up in that at times, and it makes getting a fair trial, it makes getting a accurate outcome challenging. the jury pool is made up of citizens. They're not supposed to have heard about the case, but the more publicity it is, the more likely they have heard about it. They may not disclose that when they're asked questions about it. Certainly, the publicity can sway the judge, which way the judge is going to make rulings. I think that in the more notorious a case, the less likely it is that a judge is going to rule that a confession is coerced, less likely that the judge is going to rule that a lineup procedure was unfairly suggested, even if it was. And certainly, last point I'll make is that certainly that impacts the sentences that people receive as well.
And is there much pressure, Yun-ching, on getting a conviction in Taiwan? Does it feel like that is affecting the trials or the fairness of a trial and transparency?
Well, I think so. It depends on what year you're talking about. So before, Taiwan is a relatively young democratic country. Before 1987, we were still under martial law. So I think in that historical era, a lot of convictions, even though they are not political prisoners or political cases, I think the prosecutors and the police, they were, used to make case with kind of a routine practice. But after Taiwan has democratized, entered democracy after 1987, things are different. And I think that will share more with our other countries around the world where the police and the prosecutors have pressures from the public for a safer society. So they want to make it quick. They want to get the right one, someone to blame. So I think this kind of high pressure is more common after we enter democracy.
Right. I want to talk about what usually leads to a wrongful conviction. And if we focus in on Taiwan, Shi Xianglo, he's the executive director of the Taiwan Innocence Project and attorney at law, explains what's likely to happen here in Taiwan.
那这种错误自白，不管是台湾也好，美国、日本，我们都可以看到，它其实是在刑事司法里面很重要的一个冤错案成因。那错误自白在早期，台湾的讯问被告还没有很完全的这种规范，要全程录音。早年甚至警方刑求对这种重大刑事案件刑求是比较常见的情况下面，很常出现。那晚近大约2000年之后，我们确实比较少看到错误自白，但还有一个类型也必须被提出的，就是科学证据的瑕疵。那因为科学证据它其实是法院赖以为审判的重要证据，法官会相信专家嘛，相信这些科学所说的话，认为人的证词也许前后反复，但科学不会说谎。但科学证据日新月异。现在的角度，我们去理解过往的科学，可能就知道说其实之前并不是这么严谨。其中有一点像是测谎，台湾现在还有在使用测谎证据，但对于测谎的理解，现在越来越谨慎了。早年的很多测谎证据可能是有瑕疵的，那包括像 DNA 技术也是日益进步，所以我们透过新的科学可以去找到，原来当初之所以误判，其实是当年使用的科学并不是真的那么科学。
Jeffrey, coerced confession was used against you in your trial, and you were just a minor at the time. Why was that allowed to happen, and is it still happening now?
Well, it was allowed to happen because, there's not. Well, at the time of my case, videotaping of interrogations, which is recognized as one of the best practices to do in order to reduce wrongful conviction caused by false confession. It was not the law at the time. The police were not obligated to record it, and so they didn't. And so that meant that they did illegal things to me. They They threatened me. They made false promises. And so they left that out of their testimony in the courtroom. They didn't admit that in court. Is it still happening today? Yes, it is, because while, like New York, where I'm from, we have law passed that mandates that police record custodial interrogations. Unfortunately, there's exceptions. They don't have to record in murder cases. They don't have to record in sex offenses. They don't have to record in drug cases. And then in many other states in the U.S., some states they have to record in all situations, but in other states they don't. But definitely recording of interrogation is very important. There's a bill that's being considered in New York and in some other states also, which would ban the police from lying to suspects in the course of interrogations. Right now, the police are allowed to lie.
Yun-ching, what is the rate of reopening a case and going to retrial here in Taiwan? How feasible is it to do that?
Well, I think that is similar to most of the country around the world, that reopening a case can be very difficult. And the numbers in Taiwan is that the percentage of granting a retrial at the high court level, that is the second level of the courts, in 2022 is only 0.7%, not 7%, but 0.7%. And that is only for reopening the case. We have revised our Code of Criminal Procedural Law, the Code of Criminal Procedure in 2015. So back in 2015, we have adjusted the definition of what counts as new evidence. We have broadened the definition, and we allowed new scientific method to be used as the tool to challenge original conviction. And after this 2015 revision, I think the number has slightly increased from 0.5% to 0.7%. But I don't think I'm not sure about the numbers and the statistics in the US. Maybe Jeff can share a bit, but I think in Taiwan this number is quite low.
Jeff.
The ability to overturn wrongful conviction, I mean, it's not as small a bleak outlook as what Yun-ching was mentioning in Taiwan. There's nothing easy about overturning a wrongful conviction, but it's not as difficult as the small number is that Yun-ching mentioned in Taiwan. I think that a lot of the, between media and exonerations and new media and documentaries and news stories, I think that with each person that is exonerated, I think it makes it a little bit easier for the next person, because I think that some of the information, some of the education is reaching the judges, and they're more willing to consider a claim of actual innocence or newly discovered evidence, whereas before there's more of a knee-jerk reaction just to really quickly deny, a motion to overturn a conviction.
Yun-ching.
We have 14 exonerations, but 12 among 14 have this kind of invalid scientific evidence, such as polygraph or such as just exaggerating scientific experts' witness. They have just given too much answer that is out, that is beyond their expertise. And this is a very huge problem in Taiwan.
Jeffrey.
I think that defense lawyers go wrong because they don't always counter the experts that are exaggerating. They don't counter by having their own expert called. Certainly, that is the case in many old convictions. But also a different point, but related to this, is junk science. So there have been a lot of evidence that has been allowed in courtrooms across the world, and it sounds scientific. And for decades, it's been allowed as evidence, and it's caused convictions, but they're actually junk science. Why is it junk? Because there are no scientific studies to show what is the error rate. So I'll give some examples. So things like footprints, tire tracks, bite marks, bullet lead analysis, even hair comparison tests. You can test hair for DNA. That's accurate. That's scientific. But just doing a actual hair comparison, that this is all considered to be junk science. Arson science is actually not a science. It's junk science. Why is it a junk science? Because there's nothing scientific about it. There's no studies, there's no error rate. It's a bunch of oral traditions, verbal traditions passed down from one fire chief to the next one. Well, if this kind of fire is started, it has this burn pattern. If it's used with this kind of accelerant, or if it starts here, it'll look like this. It's just words.
It's interesting because a lot of what you say is what we see in the movies and shows, and that's what's often put forward as evidence for or counter. I want to go to something that's been a development, I would say not so recently, but over the decades, is DNA. And I know that's something that helped you, Jeffrey. Can you explain how that worked in your case?
Sure. So to give context, DNA testing is only available in 10% of all serious felony cases. So while we think that a wrongful conviction couldn't happen now because we're so much more advanced and, including through DNA, it's actually only available in 10% of all serious felony cases. So 90% of the time, it cannot be used to get a result in the case because the case simply doesn't have anything that could be subjected to DNA. What is material that can be subjected to DNA testing? Hair, blood, saliva, seminal fluid. So in my case, I was excluded by the DNA before the trial happened. That was in 1990. I was found guilty anyway. Why? Because of a coerced false confession, which was obtained with the use of the polygraph, with the polygraphist being allowed to repeatedly tell the jury that I failed the polygraph when I lied in committing the crime. And so those two factors drown out the impact of the DNA. I was exonerated 16 years after being excluded by the DNA before my trial because of further DNA testing. So the technology advanced and the DNA data bank, which is called CODIS, was developed. And so they took the crime scene DNA evidence, which didn't match me, and they put it into the DNA data bank, and it matched the actual perpetrator. So to put it simply, the advancement in the technology is we went from being able to say that it wasn't my DNA to being able to say not only was it not my DNA, but it was his. And the perpetrator's DNA was only in the data bank because left free while I was doing time for his crime, he killed a second victim 3.5 years later, a school teacher with 2 children. And that has a lot to do with the danger of wrongful conviction. It's not only that it is devastating for the person, but also their family. But in a larger sense, it leaves the community in danger because the actual perpetrator is free to strike again. And that's what happened in my case.
Yun-ching, how useful is DNA testing in getting exonerations here in Taiwan?
Yes, so I have to say that I 100% agree with what Jeffrey has just talked about. DNA evidence can be very powerful regarding exonerating people and regarding of finding real perpetrator. But like in Taiwan, I think it is not as useful and powerful as it is in other countries, innocence movements. And I will explain why. So out of our 14 exonerations, we have only one DNA exoneration. And we had that case, that exoneration took place 10 years ago. For the past decade, we have none of DNA exonerations, and that's for some reasons. So first of the reasons, so a lot of cases that were received was like very old cases. They either conducted a very relatively not advanced DNA method. They are not testing. For example, they only test for YSTR DNA test that is not as precise and accurate as the normal DNA test that we think in our mind. The second point is that a lot of DNA results are, even though they are correct and accurate, but our judges, our prosecutors, our judicial systems lack of the ability to properly interpret, to explain the results. So in our first and only DNA exonerations of Taiwan Innocence Project, the judges, so he was excluded by the results, but because of the phrase that was used on the report of the result, the judges convicted him still. So this is lack of ability to understand scientific results is another problem. And I think the third factors explaining why DNA evidence is not as useful as it is in Taiwan is that we seldom have those physical evidence preserved after convictions. So in Taiwan, we all the evidence, especially physical evidence, shall be processed in a timely manner. That is on the code of in our procedural law. So basically, when the conviction is obtained, all the evidence are destroyed. So you have nothing left.
Thank you both so much. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but before we go, we have a story of a family who struggled to rebuild their relationships and lives following a wrongful conviction. Connected's Ariel 2 has this feature on the teacher and filmmaker Lai He-ying, whose father spent 3 years in jail when she was a child before his case was overturned. She documented their path to healing in a 7-year documentary project.
我就是个小学老师啊，对，然后就是日复一日，我的日子都非常的平淡。拍片这件事情就很像是我人生一个大冒险一样，我没有想过自己会去做这件事情，所以对我来讲，我的平静的生活就因为拿起相机要拍我父亲，整个就变了。
迪尔老爸，你想过最好的结局是什么吗？成为这部片的主角，你又是什么样的心情？无论如何，希望你最终能得到一些安慰，那会是我最大的心愿。
我常会觉得我就是非常脆弱和无助，可是我从来没有看过我妈表现这一面。她说她不能倒，她一直告诉我们说你要很正面的去看待这件事情，我们必须要撑下去，所以我们只能选择这样子。对，如果我在那个过程里面，我选择是看另一面，就是看我失去了什么，我被剥夺了什么，我可能会完全没有力气，就是走下去那样子。
一开始他是借着拍这个纪录片想要为爸爸平反。
那个时候的我其实是想要把案子讲清楚。我的器材其实是一个家用的，非常小，大概这样手上掌上型的一个 DB。那时候一直觉得说，就拍啊，就是这有什么难度？
当我女儿在拍摄我访问会撩拨， 疮疤会揭开来，会崩溃。
这不是天伦之乐啊！我来风景区台东，来这边关啊。
还是我们就算了。后来看那些素材的时候，我才发现我对我父亲做了非常残忍的事情。可是那个当下我是看不见的，我那个当下我只会很气愤说：“你明明是一个受冤的人，对你没有资格放弃娘。”我在观察，我灵魂里面我一直观察说，他面对就是他自己的这个生命遭遇、受冤的这件事情，还有社会带给他的这些有色眼光，他到底要如何自处？
那个亲情像刀子一样割的。我公公去世啊，他的兄弟姐妹不准他回来奔丧，理由是拍看小。
我在潜意识层面里面，我其实一直在看他，有用镜头看，也有用我自己的肉眼看，不断的在看他是怎么做的。想问他说：“老爸，那你可以教我点什么吗？”
Jeffrey Deskovic, founder of the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. Thank you so much for speaking to us and taking the time to inform us. Yun-ching Ko, Deputy Executive Director of the Taiwan Innocence Project. Thank you also for your time, for taking part in this conversation that really needs so much more discussion and it really opens up or brings to light the issues the justice system faces and the flaws we need to address. Thank you both so much. And for our viewers everywhere, it has been good to have your company. If you've enjoyed today's episode or have anything you'd like to add to the dialogue, do join the conversation on our social media. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.